Your brain makes up only about 2% of your total body weight, and yet it uses about 20% of your total energy. So your brain is one of the most energy demanding organs in your body. And if it doesn't have the nutrients it needs to produce energy efficiently, it becomes more sensitive to triggers. And that's when migraines can happen. Today, I'm going to cover 7 of the most common nutrient deficiencies associated with migraines. The first one is magnesium. There's quite a bit of research behind this. We do see lower levels of magnesium in migraine sufferers. And magnesium is really a critical cofactor needed for hundreds of enzymatic reactions in the body. And when we think about it for brain health specifically, magnesium is important for helping to stabilize the neurons. We need it for balanced neurotransmitters. It also plays a really important role in the vascular tone, so blood vessels in the brain. And then it also helps to decrease inflammation in the brain. So that one's really important. The top 2 actually are magnesium, and then the second one is riboflavin. So that's vitamin B2. So B2 is a really important cofactor for the mitochondria to produce our energy. And it's also a cofactor for the methylation cycle, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second here. But B2, very anti-inflammatory, supports energy production and methylation. And we do have a lot of studies showing that high-dose riboflavin, 400 milligrams a day, does help to greatly reduce migraines in migraine sufferers. So those are my top 2 go-tos. But as I've mentioned, I do like to do testing and make sure all of the other nutrients I'm talking about are optimized. And so the next one, number 3, is B vitamins. I kind of group them together. They tend to work together synergistically. I'm going to focus on B6, folate, and B12. Those are all really important for recycling homocysteine in the body. That's also part of the methylation pathway. And homocysteine is an inflammatory marker that has also been associated with migraine sufferers. And so, part of this methylation cycle involves B2, as mentioned earlier, B6, B12, folate. But this whole methylation cycle is responsible for DNA replication and repair. It controls how our genes are expressed, so it's turning genes on and off. It also plays a role in detoxification, neurotransmitter balance, and mood. Histamine breakdown. Histamine is another potential migraine trigger. And then, as mentioned, helping to regulate homocysteine. It's a really important biochemical pathway. And when we optimize those nutrient cofactors, everything runs a lot better. Number 4 is CoQ10. So this is a really important antioxidant, and the mitochondria need this in order to produce energy. So really, again, we have to make sure the brain has energy in order to function optimally. And, certain medications like statin drugs do deplete CoQ10. So if you're on one of those, definitely, either supplement CoQ10, check your levels if you can. I think that can be really important and helpful. Number 5 is vitamin D. So another really key nutrient. It's really considered more of a hormone in the body. Every system in the body requires vitamin D. We typically think about it for bone health, but it's important for insulin sensitivity, brain health, immune health. It helps to, balance inflammation in the body. And studies do show reduced levels of vitamin D in migraine sufferers. I also just want to point out that if you have your vitamin D levels tested and you're told you're fine, I really recommend looking at your actual vitamin D level. We have a very wide reference range for vitamin D, and the reference range is not necessarily the optimal range. A lot of times the reference range is based on the average of the population we're testing. And a lot of times we're testing when we suspect deficiency. And so, I've seen the reference range start at 20 or 30 for vitamin D. But when you look at studies that show optimal levels for preventing disease, balancing inflammation, and supporting immune health, we really see that sweet spot somewhere between 60 to 80. I generally like to see vitamin D levels at least at 50. So, definitely important to check that one out. Number 6 is iron. So iron is really important for carrying oxygen throughout the body. And you can bet the brain needs plenty of oxygen in order to function. And then iron is also a really important cofactor for the mitochondria in producing energy. And then the last one, number 7, is omega-3 essential fats. And so, I've mentioned I do a lot of nutrient testing in practice. That includes the omega-6s and omega-3s. Again, these are essential. We need both. But what I have found is a lot of us have too many omega-6s in relation to omega-3s. And remember, our cell membranes are largely made up of these essential fats. And if we have too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, all of our cells are going to be more prone to inflammation. And that inflammation, of course, can impact brain health and potentially trigger a migraine. And so the other thing I want to mention too is if you just eat fish once in a while, that's not enough to get your omega-3s balanced with your omega-6s. What I have found is the people that don't need to supplement are eating fish usually 4 to 5 days a week. And if they're not eating fish that often, they really benefit from an omega-3 supplement. And quality is definitely important when it comes to omega-3s. So, all right. So those are the 7 main nutrient categories associated with migraines. And then I also just want to touch on, if we are deficient in some of these nutrients, we want to consider why. We have to think about first, what are we eating? In the case of vitamin D, that's sun exposure, and sunscreen will block vitamin D conversion. So think about that. Of course, you don't want to sunburn. But it's, what are we taking in? Also, when it comes to food, it's what are we digesting and absorbing? I work with a lot of people that have gut issues. When there's inflammation or gut imbalances, we're generally not going to be absorbing our nutrients very well. Digestive issues, all of those things can have an impact. And then the third is, what does the body need or what is it utilizing? So there's plenty of medications that can deplete nutrients. I definitely recommend, if you're on medications, looking it up to see if they deplete any nutrients. Birth control pills, for example, deplete B6 and a host of other nutrients. So it's important to know about that. And then the other is genetics. And so I also regularly do genetic testing, and some people have higher needs for vitamin D or B12 or choline. Choline is also important for the brain. I didn't mention that one, but again, really understanding all of this can make all the difference. So especially if you've been suffering with migraines, of course, we recognize there are multiple triggers: toxic exposures, infections, hormone fluctuations, barometric pressure changes, food reactions. There's a lot to consider. But when we can optimize the nutrients needed for our mitochondria, brain energy, for that methylation cycle, when we can optimize, you might find, in most cases, people find that they become a lot more resilient. And some of the things that used to trigger a migraine won't anymore. So this is just one important piece of the puzzle. I still encourage you to investigate the rest. But, I hope you found this helpful. If you suffer from migraines, my heart goes out to you. I know how devastating it can be. And I also want you to have hope. And, if you haven't looked at your nutrient levels yet, definitely get them checked out. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.